some step in our system where the model is generating the text, then it's like, it's still going to, hallucinations are still going to prevail. So what I think we need to do, or like someone needs to do, is to, in addition to using LLMs like as we do right now, also think about like alternatives that might be, trained in a different way, like a different paradigm. But this is really hard to do. There's not, it's hard to take on a challenge like that. For most attempts are probably going to fail. Not a lot of like researchers can afford that.
I see. So researchers right now going to a completely separate way of doing things is very risky.
Welcome to govai.fm, your no-nonsense guide to AI in the public sector. Connect with peers and learn from real successes, failures, and lessons from the trenches.
Okay, so AI is being used at scale across governments and enterprises. But there is a catch. AI scores brilliantly at some tasks while failing surprisingly at some other tasks, especially when it comes to cultural knowledge, common sense, and the nuances of human natural language and communication. There are some obvious gaps. To help us understand these gaps, I'm joined today by Dr. Shwartz, Assistant Professor of Computer Science at UBC, a CIFAR AI chair at Vector Institute, a cornerstone of pan-Canadian AI strategy. Her research focuses on teaching machines common sense reasoning, among other things, and she's an author of Lost in Automatic Translation, a book exploring what we gain and lose when relying on language technologies. Welcome, Dr. Schwartz.
Thank you. Hi, Girish. Thanks for having me.
Usually the first thing that we go back to is like we just want to know you as a person and your story. And maybe one of the leading questions that might help with that is you've been doing NLP research before NLP was cool, right? Maybe you can start with what was your background and what got you there.
So my background is in computer science, and I first came across NLP in my last year of undergrad, and I was really fascinated by an area of study that combines both the computer science but also like human aspects, like how people understand language, how people communicate. Because I remember thinking during my undergrad that, I was like getting good grades, but I wasn't super excited about a lot of the courses. In fact, like the courses that I was mostly excited about were the ones that involved aspects of like real life, of like how people behave and think. Like the other one was game theory. So even today, I would say that my research leans a lot more towards the social aspects of language.
Beautiful.
Rather than like the theoretic or more like math-heavy notions of machine learning.
Cool. So about your book, it came from your personal experience. What's it like to navigate as a non-native English speaker? Maybe you can tell a story about how your personal life and the book and the natural language processing and what we are saying all jive together.
So I mean, at this point, I've been living in English-speaking countries for like almost 7 years. But in the beginning of my career, I was not as proficient as I am right now in English. And I still had to write papers in English and present at international conferences and so on. So I did feel like a clear disadvantage of having to communicate in a language other than my own compared to colleagues that grew up speaking English. What I did like at an earlier stage of my career is I tried to turn this disadvantage into an advantage by learning to communicate research in very simple words that people like me could understand. And it helps not just in terms of like the language barrier, but it also helps in general understand research better when it's something that's maybe like slightly outside of your area. So I started when I was a master's student. I started with like writing a blog, and then eventually like continued with the book. But in general, it's something that I try to practice even today when like writing papers. Like, I should say like editing my students' papers. And teaching as well. I really try to keep things simple. I'm still like a non-native English speaker, so I still sometimes find myself stuck looking for a word in English. But unfortunately, now it also happens in my native language, Hebrew, that I don't speak enough either, which is like, I guess, funny, but also frustrating.
I think that's a very special quality about you and what you do, where the research, a lot of research folks are extremely great at their research, but communicating that research to a larger audience by making it in very simple words and conceptually just deconstruct it and make it very simple is a huge thing that helps everyone. So yeah, I really appreciate that about you. So about the role in the CIFAR AI chair, like that seems like something interesting, prestigious, and I really wanted to know what does that role entail and how does that shape your research?
So you mentioned earlier that it is like the chairs program is a part of the Pan-Canadian AI strategy at CIFAR, and the goal is like to drive cutting-edge AI research and to train like the next generation of AI researchers, and then also like innovation and commercialization in general, like in Canada. So Canada's CIFAR AI chair is like a leading AI researcher that's affiliated with one of the national AI institutes, which is AMI in Edmonton, Mila in Montreal, or Vector in Toronto. I'm affiliated with the Vector Institute. Unfortunately, there isn't an institute in BC, but thankfully the Vector has a lot of my other colleagues as well from UBC. And my research, I would say, is maybe like aligned with one of CIFAR's themes of like kind of like understanding and addressing the impacts of AI on society. And yeah, I'm very lucky to be supported by CIFAR.
Super. Okay, yeah. We look forward to hearing more about maybe in the upcoming episodes about the cool work that you do at CIFAR. One of the things that I wanted to come to is talk about bias and cultural blindness. And many of our listeners, leaders who are deploying AI in governments and enterprises, know about it, have heard about it. But maybe what might help is you can break it down, like for leaders who are not technical, where does AI bias come from? Maybe you can just tell a little story about that.
Sure. I think I'll focus on large language models, LLMs, because I think
Yeah.
often, like when people say AI these days, they mean LLMs. And I would say that the bias, where bias stems in these models, would be quite similar in other models, but just for to like narrow down the scope. So LLMs are these like chatbots that we use, like ChatGPT. They're very like basic level. They're trained to predict the next word in a sentence. So it's like very much like autocomplete that we have in our phone. And to be able to do that and really be able to generate very fluent language, they are trained on massive amounts of text. So like a big portion of the text that we have online from the web. And so like the helpful thing that comes out of this process is that they learn how language works. So they learn like the statistical regularities of language, like which words come after others. And they also learn a lot of word knowledge just from like what they read online, which makes them really useful. And so like if you're looking just at this first stage, which is called pre-training, even though like we have modern LLMs these days that they are multilingual, so they support multiple languages, like Gemini or GPT-5, you can like prompt them in multiple different languages. There's still quality in different languages differs. And if you look at the reason for that, is because most of the training data is in English, because most of the data that we have online, like about half of the websites are in English. And so statistically, most of the text that they read is in English, and even more specifically coming often from US-based users or like more broadly like Western users. So when I say that they learn about the world, they actually it would be more accurate to say that they learn about the world through the lens of an US-based web user. So just one way to like exemplify that, this is a bit of an old example, and I think if the listeners like tried GPT-5, it's probably going to answer correctly. But I'd keep this one just because it's more intuitive than the other ones. If you ask the model something like, someone tipped 5%, what's the reason for that? Then it starts coming up with excuses like, oh, maybe they didn't like the service, maybe they miscalculated, maybe they have budget constraints. But completely missing the fact that in many countries, 5% is actually a generous tip.
Absolutely.
So that's a pre-training. There's a little bit extra that's happening in LLMs that I can also talk about. So after this pre-training stage, there's also something called post-training. There's like typically like two types of things that the model is trained to do. One of them is to just follow natural language instructions, like summarize the following paragraph. That comes from a data set of like instructions that are like accompanied with like their human written answers. And this is really useful. That allows them to perform like arbitrary text-based tasks. And then the other one is called preference optimization. This is where the model maybe like generates multiple answers. I'm oversimplifying here, but generally like among all the answers that the model can generate, they're trying to like align it better with human preferences, which is also called alignment. So this process also has some effect on the bias in the models, because this process is very heavily curated. So the developers of the LLMs, they decide what is like, a preferred answer, what are the human preferences. They give the guidelines for the people that like indicated their preferences. And so And one of the goals of this stage is to align models with human values. But human values is a very ill-defined concept, and then what we end up getting is like developers that are mostly, like people based in the US, computer scientists based in the US. They decide what counts as good human values, and this information ends up going into the model and has a lot of downstream implications.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, there is a lot to unpack. So there are different stages within the model. The bias goes in like so. Yeah, I understand it right. In the first stage where the model is just learning the world through reading the World Wide Web and such, the World Wide Web itself has bias, so bias goes in there. And the second broad step you mentioned is where now we teach the model how to speak to a human. Now it knows the knowledge, but now it to speak to a human, alignment and all those things. Teaching the model how to speak to the human is done by some research labs that are in US, and how to speak to a human, what biases are, what culture is, like all that is done based on preferences of a small set of people. So that small set of people is not completely representative of the whole world, right? So that's the
Exactly.
second.
And then it has a lot of downstream implications because people use it really broadly, like all over the world and in many different applications.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe going a little deeper into it. So based on your cultural benchmark research and your testing on like questions about customs and etiquettes and regional knowledge, maybe you can share some things that what you found and what are the things to be aware of when leaders are deploying these models.
Yeah, so we have like a line of work where we look at the cultural competence of various AI models, typically focusing on LLMs, but sometimes also
LLM.
looking at vision and language models. So the cultural bench, that's one of them that you mentioned. We found that it underperformed on some regions, so it was able to like answer correctly on more like Western regions, but less so on like South America or North Africa. And I would say this is directly related to the imbalance of the training data because the LLMs are mostly trained on English text coming from like Western users. It really reflects their culture. A year earlier, we had a different paper where we were looking at vision and language models. And these models, they have, without going into like exactly how they're trained, they have a very similar problem basically because they're trained on images from the web, which are mostly coming from the West.
Yeah.
So like one of the examples that we had in the paper was like if you asked a vision and language model to find pictures of breakfast from a collection of images that we collected that are representative of many different regions of the world. Even when they retrieved images that were from non-Western regions, it was typically like images that have some Western element in them. So for example, breakfast was typically like eggs and pancakes and bacon. So I would say this is mostly about the representation in the training data.
Okay, very interesting. Anything based on like what we know and what we have found out because of the research of people like you, is there anything practical that leaders right now who are deploying LLM-based AI applications in chatbots or any internal applications at their organizations, anything they can do right now?
I think that maybe the two most important things that come together are AI education and critical thinking. I think right now there's a lot of opportunities to monetize AI, and people that try to sell the products are trying to sell them as like, perfectly working products. And a lot of organizations, they think that they have to adopt AI. Otherwise, they're left out because everybody's using AI these days. I think it's really important to think carefully about these things. Think about like what your problems are, whether you can actually benefit from automating them with AI, what type of AI, because typically when we say AI these days, we mean generative AI like LLMs, but there's other types of AI that might be more suitable. And then also, if you're thinking about things like bias, then trying to think ahead, like who might benefit from this, but also who might be harmed, what can go wrong, what is the cost of errors, are we willing to tolerate that? And do we have like measures in place to quantify how well like the AI adoption is going and so on? And then, to be like completely maybe blunt, like also if the person is telling you about the AI model, are they if they're telling me this AI model is amazing, are they like objective or do they have financial incentives to sell me this product?
Absolutely. Wow. So I got a lot out of this. Tell me if I'm paraphrasing it right. So in terms of some practical advice, you said first is like, is AI even the right tech for this? Like everybody is doing AI, so look at your problem and see if AI is the right technology? Like by AI, we mean LLMs or generative AI. Is that even the right technology to solve this? Maybe it's something else. Second is you said maybe AI is, but AI is a broad umbrella. There are like different things. There can be like a classification algorithm using traditional machine learning, and you're done. So they're like, which AI? So that's what you said. Come to it. Now, after doing all of this, if you still come to like a model and say that no, I still need LLM for this, then you said do some harms modeling. So looking at who are the people who are going to be impacted by this, what all can be the things that go wrong, and what are the mitigations that we can put in the model, whether it's giving a message in the model. We mentioned that Claude and all, everybody puts a message, like model can make a mistake, they make it in a very fine print, you were saying. So do some like different things where you design within the design itself, or how the system is going to interact with the users. You said make some changes there. And then fourth, you said in spite of that, in monitoring, there can still be things that go wrong. So continue to monitor, continue to make sure what might go wrong. And then the fifth tip that you gave is look at the people who are selling you AI tools and AI products and saying that, oh, I don't know, machine translation is great, you should use this, right? Like, and look at the financial incentive and see if there is any independent evaluation, validation done that is beyond what the company themselves did who is selling the product. Did I capture?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I like it that you mentioned that like disclaimer at the bottom of the LLMs of like the model can make mistakes. I actually find that's like the bare minimum that organizations can do, because I find it very vague. This is less about like organizations adopting AI. It's more about individual users. If they're not already aware of that hallucination problem, seeing a message like that, I think most users would just like ignore that. Would not like, because why, if you're not already aware of that problem, why would you think that the computer is not like giving you a complete and precise answer?
Absolutely. It almost reminds me of like medicines. If you look at the fine print of any medicine, like you are like, oh, this will make like my eyes bleed. Like I'm not getting this, right? So it almost feels like that. But yeah, okay, thank you. These are like really specific things that many leaders can do. So this is very helpful. Yeah, next wanted to talk about hallucination and models making up things, right? Like here. And you had a talk about towards slightly less bad models, which was refreshingly honest framing of it. Maybe you can talk about the title and some details about, how we can do it.
I think I was just trying to be humble. No, but I mean, it was a talk that I presented a couple of months ago, or I guess last month, that involved work from my lab. And this work is, so there was like about different topics. One was about combining LLMs with statistical tools to develop more like better ways to identify uncertainty and that is especially useful for responsible applications in like sensitive domains like medicine and law. Then the other one was about looking at the AI cultural competence problem and then suggesting some ways forward. And then the last one was more about like generalization in models and specifically focusing on vision and language models and how they can better understand videos. So it was a lot of new things that we did, but like the reason I said like slightly less bad models is because all of these are workaround for LLMs and VLMs, like vision and language models. But we still have these fundamental issues in these models, like the hallucination and biases.
So so what is the current state of research on hallucination? Are we saying that the current way that the models are designed, we cannot get rid of hallucination, or we can mitigate it with some solutions? Where are we right now?
I think there's a lot of work on this topic right now. I would say this is like the holy grail of AI right now. But I do think it is a fundamental limitation of how these models work, and that all of the current methods are just like partial workarounds. So they are mitigating hallucinations to a certain extent, but they're not real solution as like in preventing them from happening in the first place. And the reason for that is because the hallucination problem is an artifact of how LLMs are trained to generate text and how they are used to generate text, which is word by word, based on like the statistically most likely next word, based on the statistics in the training data, rather than like human-like language understanding. And so and this is something that we actually want from the models, because we don't want the models to just retrieve information that was found verbatim online. We want it to be more than a search engine. We want it to like synthesize like information and come up with conclusions. But when it's doing that, sometimes it's also making up stuff. And the current solutions that I know of are primarily looking into, some of them are looking into like trying to explain why it's happening. But most of the methods that I know, they look at like post hoc identification and mitigation of hallucinations through things like fact checking or certain like like calibrating how certain the model is. I'm personally mostly excited about directions for like combining LLMs with more like symbolic components, like knowledge graphs and verification methods, or like Bayesian networks and so on. But I also think that as long as we have that like generative component, like as long as we have some step in our system where the model is generating the text, then it's like, yeah, it's still going to, hallucinations are still going to prevail. So what I think we need to do, or like someone needs to do, is to, in addition to using LLMs like, as we do right now, also think about like alternatives that might be, trained in a different way, like a different paradigm. But this is really hard to do. There's not, it's hard to take on a challenge like that. For most attempts are probably going to fail.
Okay.
Not a lot of like researchers can afford that.
I see. I see. So researchers right now going to a completely separate way of doing things is very risky in
Yeah,
that sense.
exactly. So
Yeah.
everybody is just trying to like use LLMs in different ways.
Yeah, got it, got it, got it. Okay, I think that's very revealing. So initially you started with like these LLMs and this technology that we are using is based on next word prediction and just turbocharging it and doing it at like a huge scale. And we want it to generalize. We don't want it to memorize anyway, right? Like we don't want
Yeah.
it to just memorize every statement and only give exactly if it memorizes, because then they won't be useful. So in a way, what we are calling hallucination is a feature in that sense, that
Exactly.
it's kind of generalizing from different contexts and mixing it together. Now, sometimes we don't think it's a feature. Like if I'm asking, what is the standard operating procedure in my company based on this document for doing this, it generalizes it like in your kind of context, this is our procedure, and it just has read it somewhere and it just gives it. So it kind of is a feature where in this context, it was not useful, and I would call it hallucinated.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, just based on that, this next word prediction and generalization, the fact that the models reason so well is so surprising. Like I know you
Yeah,
you have been
definitely.
doing this for a long time. Like my gut feel like 2016, 17, 19, like, didn't be that it would get so good just taking that BERT2 model and just making it bigger, like just giving
Yeah.
it more data to generalize it so.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I started working on NLP, like this was like, I guess 2013. I started doing research in 2014, and I was working on such basic like processing, like natural language processing tasks, like word relationships. So for example, like a cat is an animal. This seems like so like ridiculous today, but
Totally.
yeah, we have come a long way. So we're talking about the remaining limitations, but yeah, we should obviously like acknowledge that these tools are very, very
It's
impressive.
very useful. Yeah, very useful. So what you're saying is the weakness is kind of built into how the tool was made, but we cannot throw away the tool because it's so useful. And that's why most of the methods that you're saying are done post hoc. So you get the answer from the tool, like, and then you have apply some methods to see if it is accurate based on some of the facts that we can extract from the document, or you have a knowledge graph and then look that up. Like, so do some things that are use the tool, and in addition to that, do some other things, those kind of methods. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That like, would you recommend that the leaders who are using these tools to, one, be aware of hallucination, and two, look at some of the methods like that to, if you are using any of these tools, then look at some methods to mitigate hallucination?
Yeah, I think that like it depends on their like ability and like capacity to handle that, or like if they're like outsourcing this like AI tool, then they need to think about what's the cost of hallucinations in their context, and if it's even worth the benefit from like automating whatever they're trying to automate. And if they come to the conclusion that it's worth it, then yeah, they definitely need to implement any kind of like verification steps. None of them, I think, would guarantee like getting rid of hallucinations, but they need to do whatever they can.
Yeah, I think that brings me to high stakes decision making. Like you mentioned that in some aspects, your decisions are high stakes, like healthcare, right? And
Yeah.
you presented LLMs in healthcare. What is your assessment for high stakes decision making and using, I don't want to say AI, but again, LLMs and generative AI in particular?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism about like what AI can do for healthcare. There are a lot of people working on AI for healthcare. I would like say that I have done very little so far in that area. So it's something that people have been working on for many years, way before generative AI was popular. But so there's a lot that AI can help with, especially if you look at like the Canadian healthcare system where a lot of people don't have family doctors, and we have emergency departments that are crowded and healthcare professionals that are overworked. So there's something really like promising about a tool that can take some of that workload away. But at the same time, as you mentioned, like these like limitations, like hallucinations and biases, can have devastating consequences in such like contexts. So we need to be extra careful with what we automate with AI. So my group, like some of the things we're starting to do right now is looking at which tasks are in healthcare or also in the legal domain are time consuming, and so we can automate them and maybe save someone time, but relatively low risk, such that we're not gonna, like, the risk of introducing errors is not high. And the main idea is basically to like work with the professionals rather than trying to replace them.
Perfect. That the pattern more is like a time-consuming task, make it easy such that a human in the loop can double check it before it goes out to decisions, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Perfect. So that's one. And then the second is your team published research on chatbots for Canadian air passenger rights. So this is more broadly for listeners in regulatory fields. What did you learn about AI in regulatory context?
So the like working on like applications in the legal domain, that's something that we do quite a bit lately, and it's one of the most like interesting challenges for me personally, and my lab is involved in like multiple projects in the legal domain at the moment. So like in healthcare, there are a lot of like opportunities to help people like improve like the legal system's efficiency, like access to justice. Just like one of those things that you can do is like help someone like read like legal documents by like making it like simplifying things so that lay people can understand it. But again, we run into the same risks of hallucinations or like misinterpreting the law and so on. And so the work in this area that we do is particularly slow. That paper that you mentioned, that's actually the only paper I've published so far on this domain, even though we have several projects. This was like a proof of concept paper. So we worked with air passenger rights, which are, it's I don't know, for the listeners that don't know them, it's an organization that helps, like a nonprofit organization that helps air passengers in Canada understand their legal rights. So if you have like a flight cancellation or like a delay or baggage loss and so on, they have this like Facebook page and people go and ask questions. And so they have to deal with a lot of questions. And so we wanted to help them by automating some of that process. But without hallucinations, we cannot afford to give people wrong legal advice. So what we did in that proof of concept papers was basically we had like a chatbot that is just retrieving the relevant document. It's not trying to interpret or generate the answer. It just says you can, like, as a user, like explain your legal problem, but it just says I think the answer is in that document. And obviously it's not as useful. To passengers as like ChatGPT, but it guarantees that there's no hallucinations, and they still prefer it to like a Google search. But yeah, we're continuing to work on like similar applications in that domain.
I think that might be a good starting point for many organizations, where if you are in a field where you're giving legal advice, or if you're in a workers' compensation board, would I get paid if I fall in a parking lot? Like those kind of questions, they're everywhere, right? All organizations have some legal books that they have to follow and give answers to. And what you're saying is, like, maybe a starting point can be LLMs have that hallucination problem when you ask it to generate something. What if LLM can tell you that the answer is here? Like if it is 99% time right, then it can almost like show you the document, show you the paragraph within the document.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's coming as close as possible to helping you. Then it's not as fluent as a generative answer, but still it's pretty useful.
Yeah, exactly. And the nice thing about it is that similarly to like a generated answer, even if you ask it, if you're a lay person and you don't know the right terminology for what you're looking for, it should still, if it's like, like similar to the terminology that's described in the document, then it should still be able to retrieve that like specific paragraph and show it to you. The disadvantage is you still have to like read that legalese and understand it, but it is like one step forward from like having to go and read the documents on your own.
I can totally, like, and depending on how the user experience is, if you're just highlighting that within that document itself and all, it's very useful for the user, like this technology that you have and what kind of a user experience you put on it. Then that eliminates hallucination by just not doing generation. We are calling it generative AI, but we are using it more to understanding the document, understand the question, understand the context, understand whether this answer is relevant or not. Doing all of that, just the last step of it, telling it, like generating it, just stop it from that. And then Okay, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And that way, that totally is a great solution. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so I wanted to see if you had any general advice. We have covered a lot, and a lot of this will be very valuable for many leaders. But anything else we have missed out on? If somebody is, many people, many organizations I know are using AI in different fields for different things, note taking to classification to voice of customer, like lots of things. Any general advice that you can give those leaders?
I think like the same as I said before. So learn a little bit about how AI tools work.
Hmm.
Have some like critical thinking. Don't rush to deploy AI just for the sake of deploying AI. Not before setting up like metrics to quantify the success and identify the harms. And look into like additional solutions beyond generative AI that might be more right for your organization. LLMs are very
Beautiful.
powerful, but they're not always the right tool for the job.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, this is the last section. This is usually just us having some fun, just a lightning round. So maybe, taking, getting some of your hot takes. Is there a sleeper technology people underestimate that will become mainstream soon?
I'm not sure it qualifies for this definition, but at least in
Hmm.
my circles, it seems like neurosymbolic models are coming back. So like a
Okay.
combination of like neural networks with some like role-based component seems to be gaining popularity, but with the rebranding. So typically people
Yeah.
just like start giving them different names.
Got it, got it. Maybe this would be an interesting thing for many users, like neurosymbolic. Maybe can you explain it a little more to some people who don't know what that is?
Yeah, so symbolic would be like typically like a rule-based component. So that in classical AI, people are like coming up with like, all the rules and like
Hmm.
encoding all the facts about the world or all the facts that they need to know in order to perform a certain task. And that's very rigid, and that alone doesn't really work well. And neural networks, they just learn completely. So LLMs would be one type of neural network. They just learn completely like from the data, so they don't have this like principle of like how things should work, but they rather just like learn to mimic the how the data behaves. So the combination of both has like many different like approaches, but one approach could be like if you have like a knowledge graph that encodes like some knowledge in your domain that typically like human curated or expert curated, you
Hmm.
could like use that along with the LLM, maybe provide it to the LLM to reason about it, or maybe like verify the LLM answers using
Hmm.
the knowledge base.
Knowledge
So
graph.
I would say
Okay.
it's already happening like
Hmm.
it's really popular right now. It's just
Hmm.
you would find it under many different names because
Names.
I don't
Yeah.
know if it's like people are completely unaware from of like historical work, or maybe they just want to take credit for like new inventions.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, like AI is, you're saying, a broad umbrella, and like maybe two pieces of that, like one which are at the opposite ends. One is learning based on rules, and the second is learning purely based on data, and both have its advantages. And rather than having applications to one or the other, combination of while you're doing learning based on data and generating an answers, just apply some rules on top of it. Like so combine them in creative ways. And what you're saying is that there is no one like and that right now neurosymbolic is used for that because neural networks and symbolic AI. But you're saying there is no one pattern that works with them. Like you can use it. These are just two building components, and you can have like a big architecture with using these components in a different way. Maybe GraphRag is one of them. I don't know. Like
Yeah,
GraphRag is very popular.
I would definitely argue in general that RAG, like retrieval augmented generation, I would argue that it's a type of neurosymbolic model, if we're being really broad with the definition. But
Hmm.
that's why I started like thinking about it's actually happening, but people, 'cause I would say like a few years ago when people was talking about neurosymbolic models, there was a lot of like, I don't know, people were a little bit condescending about that in the like
Hmm.
machine learning
Hmm.
community, like, oh, that doesn't work.
Yeah,
It's like from
yeah,
symbolic
yeah.
AI. But now we're doing that. We're just calling
You're
it with
doing
the
it
name.
naturally. Yeah, you're right. Like we got a lot of, we have tried it in 90s, it never worked, and yeah, but now, yeah, using it for the right purpose, it's coming back. So listeners, neurosymbolic. Like next time you're talking to your AI developers or consultants or someone, ask them like if you're using generative AI, are there any rules-based technologies, neurosymbolic technologies that you can use to mitigate some of the risks? Thank you. The maybe the second question, any AI, like the opposite side of it, any AI buzzwords are too buzzwordy and you would gladly retire?
I really hate AGI,
GI, oh
artificial
my God.
general intelligence. Very ill-defined. Seems to me like a more like a kind of like a marketing term rather than like
Totally.
a
Yeah.
scientific term.
Totally. I so much agree with you. And whenever there are discussions happening and everybody gets this, Sam Altman is on some podcast and he'll get an AGI question, I fast forward it. Like, because there's going to be no value I get out of whatever he's going to say and everything. I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. Yeah. Okay. Papers or breakthroughs that most shaped your thinking?
That's a hard question to answer. I don't know about any particular paper.
Specific one. Yeah.
Yeah, I can be like diplomatic and say that like each individual paper is like standing on the shoulder of giants
Of
and
another.
making one
So
one
true.
step forward.
So true, so true. And maybe in terms of papers or breakthroughs, like just the chat GPT happened.
Yeah.
People just made a big bet on keep this transformer and just put a lot of data onto it and it'll work. Like that at that time it was not very intuitive that it will definitely work, right? Like it, yeah, maybe something
Yeah,
like
actually, the Transformer is an excellent example for that. So it came out in 2017, and I was a PhD student back then, and I was just interning at Google. And I actually attended a seminar talk where one of the authors of the Transformers paper was like explaining about it. And we were all very puzzled. It's like, it's a very strange architecture. It's not as intuitive as the architecture we were
Yeah.
using back then, like recurrent neural
Yeah,
networks.
yeah.
But it did definitely like,
Yeah,
you know, it's dominating NLP these days, and computer vision as well, and like other
everything.
areas
Yeah.
are also using transformers.
Absolutely. Yeah, everything. But one of the things that I think of when I was thinking of at that time, I wouldn't have made a big bet on like just like, billions of dollars on data centers and just take this transformer and just make it bigger and bigger. Like I wouldn't have made that bet on it. And I was trying to get an intuition on how does just next word make model understand so much theory, right?
Yeah.
And one of the examples that I like that kind of slightly clicked it is Ilyas Sutskever was giving this example. I don't know if you heard about. He was saying that imagine you're reading a book, a novel, which is a novel about mystery on this person is the murderer or killer, and you read the whole novel, and the last page has, and finally the detective found out that the killer was, and then he gives the name of the killer. And if you put that in the next word prediction problem and the model has to get it right, then it needs to understand the whole story of the novel and get it right. And if you do this at like graph scale, then you will need to kind of understand what humans mean and what is the motive of the person and and then maybe that was the intuition that kind of little bit helped me on why this worked.
That's a really good one. Yeah, it's still kind of like hard to understand how it actually implicitly learns all of that, but it's a good intuition for sure.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And language tech help or hurt language learning in the long run?
Yeah, so I touch on that in my book, and I think it will help. I think it's already helping. So if you look at like language learning apps like Duolingo, they're actually using generative AI for like to improve their app, and also people use LLMs directly to learn languages. I always think people have different reasons to learn languages rather than just to be able to communicate in that language. We have different motivations, and we've had like pretty decent translation quality with Google Translate and for like many language pairs for a decade now. It's been 10 years. 2016 was like their neural methods when they deployed them, and we could see like really big improvements in across languages, but people still continued to learn languages. So I would say maybe it's changing the way that we learn languages, but I think definitely like help.
Okay, cool. Okay, so last question. I'm sure many people will want to follow you and get to know more about your ongoing research. One thing is everybody should buy your book, but other than that, how should they follow your research?
So for my research, everything is available on my UBC website. Hopefully, so all my publications are there, and hoping to put another archive paper there soon. And for my book, I also have a website. It's lostinautomatictranslation.com. You can find it on Amazon, in bookstores, mostly online, at the Vancouver Public Library. It's available in like print, ebook, and audiobook formats. The audiobook has a really amazing narrator. It's not me. She's really good. I highly recommend that.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise here. And thank you so much for doing the great research and doing the ongoing work with CIFAR. And we look forward to hearing more about your breakthrough researches on future podcasts.
Thank you very much for having me.
This was govai.fm. Connect with us on LinkedIn, suggest a guest, and stay tuned for real stories from AI in action.